The Drashari warships crossed the boundary marker at the 4th hour of my watch, and I did not call them back. I had the channel open. I had the designation codes loaded, the standard border warden intercept sequence, the formal warning in 6 languages including Drashari trade, the broad-spectrum pulse that would have lit their navigation systems with every archived notation we had on that sector. I had all of it ready, and I let their fleet pass in silence, and I closed the channel, and I sat back in my chair, and I watched them go. That requires some explanation. I have served the Velhari border mandate for 61 years. I am not a woman who sits idle when a treaty is being broken in front of her instruments. I have turned back 7 incursions, lodged formal protest with 4 separate galactic governing bodies, and once, in the 34th year of my posting, I personally boarded a Gorath survey vessel that had drifted 6,000 kilometers into restricted airspace while its crew slept off a bad cargo run. I have never once failed to make the call. I did not make the call for the Drashari because I had read their advanced communications, and I understood something that the intercept protocols were not designed to handle. They already knew. Not the legend. Not the old archive notation. Not the border designation on the charts that every map species in this quadrant has been maintaining, in one form or another, for longer than the Velhari have kept records. They knew all of that. They had studied it. They had translated the oldest Velhari marginal notes, the Soreth navigational warnings, the Pellery silence notations. Those 3-stroke marks the Pellery carve on buoy housings to mean do not ask, do not follow, and they had concluded, as a fleet council and as a civilization, that these were the mythologized records of weaker species, and that the Drashari were not weak, and that the sector called Yeth Kaur on the ancient charts and left systematically blank on every modern one was simply an opportunity their predecessors had been too frightened to take. Their lead admiral had said as much. His name was Kaur Vedrith, and he was considered the finest strategic mind in Drashari service, and I have his fleet council address in full in my files because their communication encryption was not as good as they believed. He said, and I am translating loosely from Drashari military register, which does not have a clean equivalent for the word hubris but comes close in its concept of the unlocked jaw, the mouth open to speak before the mind has finished its thought. He said that the galaxy's blank spaces were blank because the galaxy's older species were old, and that old things are afraid, and that the Drashari were not old, and that they would fill the blank space with their flag before the next dry season came to the homeworld. He had 112 warships. He crossed the boundary marker at the 4th hour of my watch, and I let him go, and here is why. There is a document in the Velhari archive at Vel Soreth, the Deep Archive, the one that requires a mandate ranking of no less than 6th tier to access, and I am 8th tier, and it took me 11 years of service to reach that clearance, called the Yeth Kaur Compendium. It is not a single document in the traditional sense. It is an accumulation. The oldest layer is a navigational notation carved in Pellery stone script, and the Pellery became stone script users approximately 40,000 years before the Velhari learned to smelt. That layer says, in Pellery stone script, which is a language of shapes and weights and not of words at all, here the water does not flow back. The Pellery used that phrase for places you do not leave. The next layer is Soreth. The Soreth have been extinct for 9,000 years, and before they were extinct they were among the most technically advanced civilizations in this sector of the galaxy, and their layer of the compendium consists of 47 data transcriptions from 47 separate survey vessels that entered the Yeth Kaur region over a period of approximately 300 years. The transcriptions vary in length. The shortest is 11 seconds of sensor data followed by silence. The longest is 9 minutes and 42 seconds, and in those 9 minutes and 42 seconds the survey crew documents, with the flat professional calm of Soreth scientific observers, the following: a gradual failure of their long-range communications array, which they initially attribute to interference from a nearby stellar body, the appearance on their instruments of a mass they cannot categorize, a brief exchange between the ship's navigator and the ship's commander in which the navigator suggests a course correction and the commander agrees, and then silence. The 47 transcriptions do not include any return transmissions. The Soreth sent 47 vessels into Yeth Kaur over 3 centuries. The Soreth, being Soreth, were meticulous record keepers. There is no record of any vessel returning. I have listened to that 9-minute recording 11 times over the course of my career. The navigator's voice, in the final exchange, carries nothing I would call fear. It carries something quieter than fear, the flat, precise tone of a trained professional who has just seen something on an instrument panel that the panel was not designed to display, and who is doing the only rational thing available, which is to suggest a course correction and hope the commander agrees quickly. The commander agrees in 2 words. There is no panic in those 2 words either. There is only the sound of someone making a decision at the exact moment the decision becomes irrelevant. The Soreth did not send a 48th vessel. They designated the region, updated their charts, and within a generation had developed a cultural practice, almost religious in character, though the Soreth would have rejected that word, of simply not discussing it. A Velhari anthropologist, working from Soreth records 3,000 years after their extinction, noted that the Yeth Kaur designation appears in exactly 0 Soreth public documents from that point forward. It appears only in restricted navigational charts, amended once per generation, always with the same notation: do not approach, do not survey, designation unchanged. The Soreth were careful people. They had seen enough. My own species has been maintaining the designation for approximately 6,000 years. I know how it began for us, because unlike the Soreth, we were not subtle, and our early records are a mess of alarm and argument and committee minutes, and the committee minutes from the 6th expansion period are very clear on what happened. A Velhari colonization fleet, 22 ships, a proper organized expansion mission with agricultural specialists and terraforming equipment and the children of 14 separate founding families, entered Yeth Kaur on the recommendation of a survey probe that had, 6 months earlier, detected an apparently habitable system inside the region. The probe had returned. The colonization fleet did not. The committee argued about it for 40 years. Some said equipment failure. Some said the probe data was corrupted. Some said what the Pellery stone script had said and what the Soreth had concluded, which is the thing they do not put in the public record but which 8th tier clearance lets you read plainly, that the sector was occupied, and that whatever occupied it had no interest in survey probes, and a very clear response to colonization fleets. In the end, the committee did what committees do when confronted with something they cannot file or adjudicate or vote away. They designated the region. They amended the charts. They added their notation to the compendium, below the Pellery stone shapes and the 47 Soreth transcriptions. The Velhari notation is more verbose than either. We are a verbose people, but it says, in essence, the same thing the Pellery said 4,000 years before us: here the water does not flow back. The compendium has 31 layers. I have read all of them. They span, depending on how you calibrate the oldest Pellery dating, somewhere between 38 and 42,000 years. 31 civilizations, ranging from the stone-marking Pellery to the Soreth at the height of their technical achievement to my own species 6,000 years ago to 17 others I will not catalogue here because this is a Border Watch report, not a cultural survey. 31 civilizations, over 40,000 years, came to the same designation, the same conclusion, the same marginal note. Some of them phrased it as warning, some as prohibition, some, like the Pellery, as simple description, a fact of geography, like noting that a river runs west. None of them sent a second expedition. Kaur Vedrith sent 112 warships. I watched them on my instruments for 6 hours and 40 minutes. That is a long time to watch a fleet in transit. I logged their heading, their formation, their speed, their communication patterns, all standard mandate documentation, the kind of report I have filed 1,000 times. Their internal communications were active throughout. I could not decrypt them at range, but the signal cadence was steady, the kind of dense, overlapping traffic that a 100-ship fleet generates when it is moving in organized formation. Course adjustments, formation checks, the ordinary chatter of a military operation running on schedule. At the 5-hour mark, the chatter shifted register, less traffic, longer intervals between exchanges. I noted it in the log without conclusion. At the 6-hour mark they crossed the inner boundary, the one marked on the oldest charts with the Pellery 3-stroke silence notation. My instruments registered their transponder signals, all 112 of them, steady and regular. The communication traffic had stopped entirely by then. I had noted that too. At 6 hours and 41 minutes, I had 112 transponder signals. At 6 hours and 42 minutes, I had none. No debris field.
No distress transmission.
No scatter pattern consistent with combat or explosion or drive failure. 112 transponder signals, and then silence, the same silence the Soreth survey crew found at the end of their 9 minutes and 42 seconds, the silence at the bottom of all 31 layers of the compendium. I ran the diagnostic. I checked the instruments. I queried the boundary buoys, 6 of them at intervals across the inner marker, and all 6 confirmed. The signals had been present, and then they had not been present, and the sector beyond the inner boundary was, as far as any instrument I had could determine, completely empty. I sat with that for a while. Then I filed my report, and I updated the boundary log, and I did something I had never done in 61 years of service. I opened the compendium file. I keep a working copy on my station archive. 8th tier access confirmed every quarter, and I added a notation. Not a formal layer. The mandate archivists will add the formal layer when they process my report. This was a marginal note, the kind a warden adds in her own hand when she has seen something that the formal language of reports does not quite hold. I added it below the 31st layer, in the space the archivists leave for working notes. It says, 112, gone at the 42nd minute, no debris, no signal, sector empty. Then I added one more line, because I have been doing this long enough to know what the next civilization will want to read when they find this compendium and start arguing about whether the designation still applies. The line says, the designation still applies. I did not include, in my marginal note or in my formal report, any speculation about what lives in Yeth Kaur, or what it did with 112 Drashari warships, or whether the Drashari on those warships knew, in the 42nd minute, that they had been wrong about what old things are afraid of. That is not the kind of speculation that belongs in a Border Watch report. What I know, what 31 civilizations and 40,000 years of accumulated notations know, is this: the sector is occupied. The occupants have been there since before the Pellery carved their first navigation stone, and in 40,000 years of contact with approaching vessels they have never once given any of those vessels reason to believe that leaving was an option. Not one of the 31 civilizations that designated this region came to that designation because they found wreckage. They came to it because they found nothing. No wreckage, no signal, no debris, no return. Simply the silence on the other side of the marker, and the instruments reading empty, and the understanding that empty does not mean uninhabited. It means the opposite. I closed the compendium. I poured myself a measure of the Soreth grain spirits I keep for the end of a long watch. It is a habit, drinking spirits fermented from the agriculture of a 9,000-year-dead civilization. I have done it for 30 years and I do not intend to stop, and I sat in my chair, and I looked at the boundary marker on my instruments, steady and unmoved, and the sector beyond it steady and empty, and I finished my drink in the particular silence that I have come to understand, after 61 years, is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something that has decided not to announce itself. The mandate will send a formal notification to the Drashari Homeworld Authority. I have drafted it. It will inform them that 112 vessels under the command of Fleet Admiral Kaur Vedrith crossed the Yeth Kaur boundary designation at the 4th hour of my watch, and that as of 6 hours and 42 minutes into their transit, all vessel transponder signals ceased simultaneously, and that no signals have been detected since. The notification will include a formal copy of the current boundary designation and a recommendation that the Drashari Homeworld Authority consider the sector closed for navigation and refrain from sending search vessels. They will not take that recommendation. They will send search vessels. I have already, quietly, added a notation to the compendium's working margin for that eventuality. It says, see also the entry above.